Welcome to the Pulse Flower Micro Summit. My name is Tanya Durr, Director of Diversification and Market Insights with Pulse Canada, and I'll be your host for today's event. Today, we will be focusing on pulse flours. That's flours from peas, lentils, chickpeas, and beans. Pulse flours is not a new ingredient. However, the last decade has seen a shift in where these flours are being used. Today, we're going to learn about the unique benefits of pulse flours, how flour processing plays a big role in getting these flours to perform in your application. And lastly, we will get a snapshot of what's happening in the market and how companies are using pulse flours to their benefit. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll hope you will get an appreciation for the value that pulse flours can bring to your product innovations. We have 3 speakers today. Before I introduce, I have a few housekeeping items to mention. If you'd like to ask a question or chat with other attendees, just type your message into the chat panel on the right side of the screen. We will be taking questions at the end of all presentations. If you find you're having any issues during the session, try to refresh your browser. Finally, I want to mention we have a number of additional resources available within the event, including some of the studies that will be mentioned throughout the session, plus other white papers and tools. We invite you to explore these on the reception page after the session wraps up. You'll be able to access the event until 9 a.m. Central on Friday morning this week. So that wraps it up in terms of housekeeping items. Be sure to type your message to communicate with us, refresh if needed, and lastly, be sure to check out our resources. So allow me to introduce our speakers for today. We have Julianne Curran, VP of Market Innovation, Janelle Purcell, Director of Quality and Processing, and I will also be presenting at the end. And again, my name is Tanya Durr, Director of Diversification and Market Insights. So thank you to everyone for coming together today for our Pulse Flour Micro Summit. Now, Julianne will be our first speaker on powering nutrient claims and sustainability stories. Julianne leads our team here at Pulse Canada. She's our guiding light. We're focused on growing the pulse sector, and Julianne has a PhD in nutrition, and today she's going to shed some light on the unique benefits of pulse flours and how you can leverage these benefits in your product portfolios. So Julianne, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks Tanya. So I'm going to kick things off today and talk about how pulse flours can support your nutrition claims and sustainability stories. When we're talking about pulses, we're referring to the dry edible seeds of potted plants in the legume family. So all pulses are legumes, but not all legumes are pulses. And the category of pulses includes peas, dried beans, lentils, chickpeas, and faba beans. Those are the predominant pulse crops that we grow here in Canada. So although pulses have been consumed traditionally as a whole food, we have seen a lot of growth in pulse ingredient processing over the last 15 years or so. A lot of this growth has been in fractionation, predominantly of peas into protein and fiber and starch fractions. And we've seen a lot of growth in use of those ingredients, but there's also a lot of opportunity to use pulse flours. And that's going to be the focus of our micro summit today. Pulse flours have a lot of opportunity because they are really aligned with consumer demand for less processed, clean label ingredients. They also meet that trend for plant-based protein. And a lot of the reason that pulses and pulse ingredients started to increase their utilization in packaged foods over the last 15 years has been because of their gluten-free attribute. But what we're going to talk about today is primarily the ways that pulse flours can be used to boost nutrition, improve sustainability, and then also provide some functional benefits in a range of food product applications. In the US food market, wheat flour is predominantly used as a source of flour, but there are a lot of other flours being used, including wholemeal flour, soy flour, rye flour, rice flour, barley flour, quinoa, and then pulse flours, of course. And the volume of pulse flours is actually about 220,000 tons. And although this is small compared to the wheat flour volume use, which is estimated about 13 million tons, there's still a lot of opportunity to use significantly more pulse flours in the packaged foods sector and in ingredient processing due to the volumes that we produce here in Canada. We grow about 7 million tons of pulses. So a lot of potential there for more value-added processing. This was from a 2020 Euromonitor study where they predicted that the compound annual growth rate for pulse flours would be 20% in comparison to wheat flour and other flours where that growth would actually decline or else be stagnant. And this figure shows the new product launches containing pulse flours in North America from 2016 to 2022. So on the left-hand side, or the y-axis, you see the different product categories where these launches have occurred. On the bottom, you have the number of launches during that time period, and the different color blocks are showing the different pulse flours that were included in those launches. But what I want to direct your attention to in particular is the categories on the left-hand side. So we've seen a lot of innovation in snacks, pet food, side dishes, bakery, meals and meal centers, also in processed meat and breakfast cereals. But in particular, even in those meals and meal centers and those side dish, a lot of those launches, including pulse flours, were due to the inclusion of pasta that was made from pulse flour. So we are really seeing a lot of innovation in the cereal-based foods category. And for that reason, I'm going to focus specifically on that particular category and highlight some of the nutrition and sustainability advantages that pulses can offer for cereal-based foods. This figure shows the nutrient composition of lentil compared to some other cereal flours. And we've got in blue the protein composition, and in that gold or greeny color is the fiber composition. And as you can just see visually, there is significantly more fiber and protein in lentil, as would be the case for other pulses, than we have in wheat, rice, and corn. This is particularly relevant because a 2020 study done by the International Food Information Council found that many Americans are actually looking to consume more protein and fiber. So in fact, 59% of Americans said they were trying to consume more protein, and 53% said they were trying to consume more fiber. Further to this, for those looking to consume more protein and fiber, they are looking to food as the primary source to get those nutrients. And this is in contrast to other vitamins and minerals, other nutrients where they may actually be looking to supplements to get those nutrients. So it provides a great opportunity for the food industry to deliver those nutrients in foods. As you can see in this figure that shows the protein content of pulse flours in the top half compared to cereal flours in the bottom half, pulses on average generally have about 2 to 3 times the amount of protein as compared to these other cereal flours, including corn flour, semolina, white rice flour, whole wheat flour, and all-purpose flour. But when we want to make protein claims on food products, it's not just dependent on the content of protein in those products, but it's also impacted by the quality. In Canada, in order to make a protein claim, you must meet a threshold for a protein rating, and that protein rating is based on a protein quality measure called the protein efficiency ratio. In the US, you must quantify your amount of protein in a product based on the percent daily value that food product is providing for protein. But again, that amount of protein must be corrected based on the protein quality or the PD-CAS score. And so essentially, to make a claim on protein, it's not just about content. You are going to be impacted if your product doesn't have a high protein quality. You may be not able to make these claims on protein. When we're talking about quality of protein, we have opportunities to use both animal sources and plant protein sources. Both animal and plant sources of protein can have high levels of protein, but animal protein sources are high in all the essential amino acids, or the amino acids that you must get from the diet because your body cannot synthesize them. Animal protein sources also generally have a high digestibility. In comparison, plant protein sources, although they may be high in protein, they will be low in one or more of the essential amino acids. They also may have a lower digestibility as compared to animal protein sources. So generally, plant sources do have a lower protein quality than animal sources. But these plant protein sources also differ in their amino acid composition, and in particularly their composition of the essential amino acids. But generally, the protein composition or amino acid composition of pulses actually complements that of cereals, nuts, and seeds. So while pulses are going to be high in lysine, they are low in methionine, and cereals and grains are the opposite. They are generally high in methionine but low in lysine. So what happens when you blend those ingredients together, you do get a more complete essential amino acid profile. So there's a real advantage when you're blending these ingredients together. Now this slide here shows the flour blends that have been used in the US packaged foods market in 2020 with pulses. And you can see that there is a lot of blending going on. For lentil flour, it's been blended primarily with rice and barley flour in products in the marketplace. With respect to chickpea, we're seeing most of the blends having just chickpea and rice. And then with beans, it's most commonly blended with corn. Tanya mentioned earlier some of the resources that we have on the platform, and one of the resources that we have launched, and it's also available on our website, is a nutrition calculator. So I just want to show you some snapshots here of some blends that I created using this calculator, just to give you an idea of how blending pulse flours can improve the nutritional quality. So if we look at that bean and corn blend, which we talked about being one of the common blends being used in the marketplace, you see in this box here that just to the right of the screen, 100% corn flour has a fiber content of 8 grams, 8 grams of fiber, 8 grams of protein, and a PD-Cas of 0.31. But if you look at what happens when you blend that corn flour with 40% bean flour, you get a real boost in fiber and protein, so an increase of 6 grams, and you also more than double that protein quality score, that PD-Cas score. Here's another example using lentil flour and barley flour. On the right-hand side in that box, you can see the composition for the 100% barley flour. Got 11 grams of fiber, 12 grams of protein, and a PD-Cas score of 0.48. And then when you blend with lentil flour, 36% lentil flour is what gets you to that optimal PD-Cas score of 0.85, which again is almost double. And then you're also again boosting your protein and your fiber. And then similarly with rice flour blended with chickpea flour, again, you're getting a significant boost in protein quality as measured by the PD-Cas score, again, more than double the score when you blend rice flour with 27% chickpea flour, and you're boosting, again, your fiber and your protein. So it's all about finding that right blend ratio that is going to optimize the amino acid composition and how those amino acids complement each other in the formulation. So the calculator that we have on the website is just meant to give sort of an initial look, a rough idea of how you can optimize some of these different blends with different ingredients. But when you're actually going to calculate a PD-Cas score or protein quality of a food product, you need to have data specific to those ingredients that you're using. So you have to have good amino acid data. You need to know the percent protein of each contributing ingredient that's providing protein, and then the digestibility of the different protein sources as well. But you can source some of this information from a credible reference. And again, we've posted some of those references on the hub here within the resources. So you can check that out afterwards. And if you're looking for something that's not there, we'd be happy to also help direct you towards that. So as you saw in a lot of those examples with the calculator, using pulse flours in addition to the protein advantage are adding significant fiber to formulations. And this figure shows why that is. We've got the fiber content of pulse flours on the top half of the figure here, and then the fiber content of cereal flours is on the bottom half. You can see, very significant differences between the pulse flours and many of these cereal flours, with pulse flours having very high levels of fiber. And in addition to having fiber, both soluble and insoluble fiber in pulses, they also have a lot of complex carbohydrates like starch, which is resistant or slowly digested, and oligosaccharides, which are the longer chain carbohydrates. And more recent definitions of dietary fiber and methods that are being used to analyze fiber are now, in fact, capturing a lot of these other carbohydrate compounds that behave like fiber in the body. So they're digested slowly, fermented by bacteria, etc. So this is where pulses can really provide an advantage in boosting fiber. Now, fiber is a carbohydrate, and I think it's just interesting to note that fiber is a very nutritious and healthy carbohydrate, but there still is a perception amongst consumers that carbohydrates are not healthy. So this is, again, some data from the 2022 International Food Information Council survey, and they cite consumers. 21% of consumers viewing carbohydrates as contributing to weight gain, but actually more consumers do see sugars as contributing to weight gain. So, they do recognize, I think, that there's different quality of carbohydrate in that. There's another point here just off to the side that it's more consumers that are in fair or poor health that have this belief. So 34% of consumers in fair or poor health believe that calories from carbohydrates are most likely to cause weight gain, versus 19 consumers who are in excellent or very good health that have that view. So there is, I think, a bit of a recognition that the quality of carbohydrate can contribute to good health. And that is something that nutrition experts cite, that it's really not the quantity of carbohydrate, but it's the quality of carbohydrate that is an indicator of nutritional value. This is a paper that we did include in the resource section of the hub here, so you can go and take a look at this, but it was published earlier this year. And it was looking at ways to promote carbohydrate quality, or simple metrics. And as you can see by this figure, the composition of food and the different nutrients are, of course, going to contribute to how that food is digested, the glycemic response, the digestibility, and all of that contributes to nutritional status. But what nutrition experts have noted is that if you just looked specifically at 3 nutrients, so if you looked at carbohydrates, added or free sugars, and dietary fiber, that provides a real significant indicator of nutritional value of food product. And so they have also proposed that you can use a ratio of those nutrients, so carbohydrates, fiber, and added sugars, and you can use that ratio to determine whether or not a food is of high carbohydrate quality. And in fact, they've looked at these different ratios and applied them to different food products. And what they recommended is that the very simple ratio, that's the first one listed here in the table, just that carbohydrate to fiber ratio, is actually effective for identifying products that have better nutritional quality. So they will have higher protein, higher vitamins, higher micronutrients if the food product has at least 1 gram of fiber per 10 gram of carbohydrate. And I just wanted to show here how that's likely possible. If you think about, we talked about pulses and their fiber content, and you look as well as all of the vitamins and minerals that they have in addition as advantages nutritionally compared to some of these other flours that are lower in fiber. Of course, whole wheat flour here is higher in fiber, and you see along the second from the bottom there that flour also does have higher higher mineral content here. So the researchers in that study, have cited the need to still do more work to explore whether or not that simple metric of the carbohydrate to fiber ratio could be used with consumers to help them identify products in the marketplace. But I just did a real simple example here just to demonstrate with 2 different pasta products. And so I've looked at just a regular durum semolina pasta product compared to a pasta that was made with 100% red lentil. And you can see here the ratio of carbohydrate to fiber is quite a bit different for the red lentil product. We're almost 2 grams of fiber per 10 grams of carbohydrate in that product, whereas in the regular pasta, there's only a 0.5 gram of fiber per 10 grams of carbohydrate. And then accordingly, we're seeing a big jump in the protein content, as well as a couple of the minerals here, potassium and calcium. So it's just an example of that recommended ratio from that paper. So with respect to ways to communicate carbohydrate quality, that potentially could be one option, that ratio. We're seeing this example here on the left, and a product in the marketplace where they are calling out the net carbs in the product that was made with 100% pea flour compared to a traditional pasta made with wheat flour. And so that net carb calculation is based on total carbs minus the fiber content. And then we also, in certain countries, Australia, New Zealand, also South Africa, there is use of glycemic index labeling. We don't have that here in North America, but it is another opportunity that some manufacturers will take advantage of for using pulse flours in order to lower the glycemic index. Of course, that has to be tested, and that's one of the disadvantages. You have to test specifically the product based on the formulation. It's not just a simple calculation that can be done. But here's one example here from a study where bread that was made with 16% lentil flour did have a reduced glycemic index. Talked so far a lot about nutrition, and particularly protein and fiber. And those are really important because they contribute to consumer perception of the healthfulness of a product, which is a major consumer driver. Again, these are results from the IFIC 2022 study. So healthfulness is in green in terms of a purchase driver over time. It's third only after taste and price. Those are always king. I also want to direct your attention to environmental sustainability. So it had gone down, about 5 years ago, but we're starting to see it go up. At least it went up again in 2022 as becoming, again, more important for consumers as a purchase driver. And of those consumers who do consider sustainability important as a purchase driver, again, results from IFIC, looking at what about different products do consumers perceive that make it more environmentally sustainable or having a lower carbon footprint. And what's interesting here is, we're seeing a lot of attention on recyclable packaging, as well as, a product or ingredient being locally grown, as well as organic, non-GMO. But I wanted to just highlight here, and this is a schematic from Barilla where they looked at actually what are the environmental impacts from different stages along the life cycle of the product. And you can see here in the very first column that the raw material cultivation is what does have the most significant impact on the environmental footprint, as well as the cooking. So it is not necessarily the packaging or the distribution, in the case of this product, that are contributing to the environmental impact of the product. And so when we're looking to reduce that impact from production and sourcing of the raw materials, that's where pulses really do have some unique advantages. They are a crop that fixes their own nitrogen, so they do not require nitrogen fertilizer as other crops, many other crops do. And so this contributes to their low carbon footprint. They also add nutrients naturally back into the soil, contribute to improved soil health. Pulses are commonly grown in rotation with other crops, and by doing so, they provide a lot of benefit to the crops that are grown afterwards, including increased yields and also reduced needs for fertilizer of those crops as well. And pulses are a crop that do not require a lot of water to grow. So that is another one of their sustainability benefits. We did do a study a few years back where we looked at the impact of reformulating different cereal-based foods with pulse flours. So pea flour on the left and lentil flour on the right here in orange. You see the dark bars are the traditional formulations with wheat flour. And then in green for peas and in orange for lentil are the reformulated products. And the inclusion rates are just noted at the bottom of each product category there. But generally, the inclusion of pulse flours within these formulations did result in a reduced greenhouse gas emissions of the product. So in closing, just want to sort of drive home the message of nutrition and sustainability as being an opportunity for using pulse flours. And just to link that back with being key drivers for why consumers are really looking to consume more plant-based foods and looking to consume more plant-based protein is really because of nutrition and sustainability. But I think that this is also an opportunity in particular for for cereal-based foods. And just want to close on this point. And this is from a study that was done a few years ago. But we looked at protein intake in the diet of Canadians and looked at what happened as Canadians were consuming more plant protein in their diet, or a higher proportion of plant protein in their diet. So we've got the first column here, quartile one, is consumers that only got about 25% of their protein from plant. The second quartile, they're getting 25 to almost 50% of protein from plant sources, 50 to 75% of protein from plant sources in the third quartile, and the last quartile, we're getting 75 to 100% of protein from plant sources. But what you'll notice is as we increase our intake of plant protein, we're actually eating a lot more breads, rolls, crackers, and grains. And so that's why I really think there's an opportunity here to improve that nutrition sustainability for those products, to help deliver what consumers are looking for when they are looking for plant protein. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Tanya, and I think we'll have time for questions at the end.
Great. Thank you, Julianne. That was a really compelling presentation, and it's really not about the amount of the nutrients, about the quality. And I like just even about, it's not what you're eating, but when you're eating throughout the day. It's there's a lot there. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to reserve the questions to the end of the presentations so that we can discuss more collectively. I know so keep those questions coming in. I know there was questions about having the presentations of it made available after. We will be following up after the event, and you will have access to the presentations. So that will be available. And so what we're going to do now is switch gears. Now we heard a lot about the nutrition and sustainability benefits of pulses, and digging into the data, the details of that data. We're going to switch now over to the functionality piece, and Janelle is going to present on, her title is Functionality and Performance. And Janelle has an in-depth understanding of quality and how processing plays a critical role. And so while you might be focused on product development in your work, understanding how these flours are made or how they come to be can in fact optimize that R&D process. So and really just streamline that process. So Janelle has her presentation up, so I'll pass it on to her right now. Janelle?
Thanks, Tanya. So hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. So as it was mentioned, I'm going to be talking about how you can actually use these flours in food systems. So we learned a lot from Julianne's presentation on why and a lot of the drivers behind growth in this sector, but we're going to dive into how you can actually begin to use them and incorporate them into food products. So one of the more influential factors when we're talking about pulse flour performance is actually the processing of that flour. So I'm going to take some time here at the front of my presentation to talk about influence of some of the raw seed material, how processing steps themselves can influence that functionality, as well as get into what types of pulse flours are available out there. There's many, many different types of pulse flours. So how can we navigate this space? And then get into the actual end use applications and performance of these within foods. So when we're talking about pulse flour production, mainly we're using a pulse milling process. So what that is a multi-step process that involves grinding, particle size reduction, and systematic sieving, where you're starting with that incoming raw seed material. It's cleaned and sorted, and then it undergoes an array of optional steps that could be applied either before or after processing, before it's packaged up and shipped out. So I'm going to take some time to talk about these optional steps because these are really important when we're talking about the identity of the flour or some of these physical chemical characteristics of the flour. But before that, I wanted to take some time to talk about the whole seeds, the whole pulses, and how variability in some of these seeds can really affect the functionality of that flour. So things that are attributed to that whole seed quality, so that's the composition as well as physical seed characteristics, these can all have an effect on how you would mill a flour and then the resulting quality of that flour. So here you'll note a couple diagrams of the seed where the majority of these seed components are found concentrated in that internal portion of the seed that's known as the cotyledon. So within that cotyledon, we have proteins, we have starches that are complexed with one another, and they're found entrapped within cell walls. And that cell wall fragments that are found within the cotyledon are actually quite rich in fiber. So you'll note there's a couple fibrous components like pectins, xyloglucose, cellulose. So we do have a pretty rich concentration of all of these macronutrients within that internal portion of the seed. And then pulse seeds are also surrounded by an external seed coat, which is mainly composed of insoluble fibers. So when we're talking about differences in things like the composition and those physical seed qualities, these are things that can have an effect on milling. So just as an example, the fiber content can be an indication of that cell wall thickness within the cotyledon, and that affects the brittleness of the seed, so that ease to which it'll break down when you're applying a milling force to it. So having a higher fiber content might be an indication that the seed could be more brittle and then thus have less energy required to mill it. And what that can do is result in a more uniform particle size distribution of that flour later down the line. And that particle size distribution is something that's quite relevant when we're talking about pulse flour functionality. Another example here is that amylose content, which is one of the components of starch, is something that can vary within a pulse seed. And that's really important when we're talking about rheological properties of the flour when you're mixing it in heat and excess moisture conditions. So all of these compositional and seed physical characteristics can be influenced by a number of things, including environmental factors, agricultural management practices, as well as the genetics of that variety that we're growing. So this slide here is just highlighting a map of the regions in Canada where we grow pulses. And you can see here that it spans quite a wide range of geographical conditions. And what that does is it introduces differences in the weather. It could introduce differences in soil types, depending on the individual farms. They might be stored a little bit differently after harvest. And that can cause some variability in all of these things that are relevant when we're talking about flower quality. And I really wanted to highlight this, as this is something that has an influence not only on the whole seed, but that flower. So this is just an example of that, where pea and lentil flowers that were evaluated for their bread baking performance. I've pulled a quote from this particular study here, that genetic and environmental factors were found to impact the flower composition, the flower functional properties, as well as the quality of the bread in which these flowers were baked in. So it's something that plays a really important role across the entire supply chain, and it's definitely important to kind of keep in the back of your minds. This is just another example of that. So we talked a lot about how pulses are a very rich source of protein and how that's a really big benefit and driver. But the protein content itself is something that can be quite variable as a result of some of these factors. So this is the results of a project that we are running here through Pulse Canada, looking at 10 yellow pea varieties that are grown at 10 different locations across the Canadian prairies. And we're monitoring for things like protein content, moisture, starch, and you're seeing the results from protein here, where you can see that over the 2 years of this study that are presented, there's quite a significant range in the protein content from 18 to 28%, where we're seeing differences as a result of variety, where specific varieties might have an intrinsically higher protein content regardless of where they're grown, and also a significant site year effect, which is very indicative of environmental influences, so things like the weather, on that protein quality data. So these are things that are really important to consider, but then also getting into the processing. So when we're talking about pulse flowers, there's two really big categories that we're actually talking about, and that's distinguishing between whole and dehulled flowers. So dehulling is a process in which abrasive forces are applied. And what that does is it physically removes that external seed coat from the interior portion of the seed. And then you can grind that down and produce a flower. The seed coat itself that has then been removed, that can actually be ground down. And because it's a significant source of fiber, you can actually use that on its own as a fiber ingredient, or you can actually reintroduce that back into the ground cotyledon to create a whole flower. So it's a very similar concept to a whole wheat flour or a white wheat flour, except we do still have significant concentrations of fiber within that cotyledon. So as a result, there's two types of flours that can be produced from the milling process, dehulled and whole, where again, whole flour contains all of the components of the pulse seed. So if we take a look at how that might affect the composition of the flour, this is some data from Siggy Now Cereals Canada, in which they were looking at finely ground pin milled flours, both whole and split yellow peas. So you can see that by removing that fiber-rich hull fraction, you're seeing increases in the concentrations of some of the other compositional factors, so things like protein and starch. And because that hull fraction contains a lot of fiber, you're seeing decreases in some of the total dietary fiber. But again, if you remember, there still is some fiber present within the cotyledon, within those cell walls. So we are able to retain a lot of fiber still in the dehulled flour fraction. So there are another number of processing techniques that can also be applied in addition to dehulling that can then modify some of these flour properties. And these are mainly done either before on the whole seed or directly following milling on the flour. And there's a number of different techniques that are applied by the industry for a number of different reasons. So they might be done to help to actually facilitate that grinding process, or to modify things like the nutritional properties, the functional properties, or the sensory properties of that flour. So I have a couple of examples that are highlighted here on this slide. A very common one is deflavoring technologies, because there's bitter and beany notes that are often associated with pulse flowers. There's a lot of techniques that have been developed to help mitigate some of those sensory qualities of the flower. So here's just an example of a pretreatment. So this is lentil flower, in which the lentil seed was subjected to different tempering conditions as well as different infrared heating levels, and looking at how that affected the flower functionality. So here you'll note that the infrared heating, often what that does is it causes partial gelatinization of the starch within the seed. And then what that does is let that starch able to absorb and swell and absorb more water. So you can see here that a lot of these lentil flowers that were subjected to that infrared heating treatment were actually able to retain more water, as indicated by their water holding capacity. Interestingly, though, if you look at the oil binding capacity, this is often related to the amount of protein, because protein is where you get a lot more of those hydrophobic moieties that can actually bind and retain oil, where there really wasn't a lot of differences at the 130 degrees Celsius infrared heating level. But at the 150 degrees Celsius, you're able to see that potentially there's some protein denaturation that began able to unfold some of these proteins and expose more of those hydrophobic regions, allowing it to bind more oil. But one thing that's interesting here, and I wanted to highlight that was only the case for one of the varieties. So again, kind of emphasizing that importance of genetics and environment on some of these functionality properties. Here's just an example of a post-treatment. So this is a study that looked at supercritical carbon dioxide and ethanol fluid extraction. And this was with the intention to remove some of those bitter and beany notes associated with the sensory properties of pea flower, where those that are highlighted on the righter portion of each of these individual graphs, you can see that this treatment was quite successful in reducing or eliminating a lot of these volatile compounds present within the pea flower. And I also found this particular study really interesting, because you can see that there was, on the raw flower side, an effect of particle size, where there's almost a U shape, where coarse and medium ground flowers exhibited lower concentrations of some of these volatile compounds. So I think that really sets the stage here to introduce the next section, where we're talking about how processing itself can be a really motivating or really unique tool to actually create custom and versatile ingredients that are really specified for an intended end use. So one of the ways that processors and suppliers of pulse flowers can do so is by changing the type of mill as well as the settings on the mill, because these play a very crucial role in determining physical properties of the flower, as well as lends into some of the functional properties of the flower. And the reason that this happens is because each mill has a distinct force of action in which it grinds down that seeds during the particle size reduction process. And it can also provide a varying level of control over things like the resulting particle size, which can be very important when we're talking about flower functionality. And I like to highlight this particular image. So this is again from Cereals Canada, looking at yellow pea flower that was milled using 4 different milling technologies. And you can just really visually see here that how these mills influence the functionality of the flower, where it could change the dough rheology, which ultimately affects the cookie thickness, the cookie diameter, the cookie spread. So it's a really important thing to consider when we're talking about the functionality of pulse flowers. Another tool that millers can use is the use of sieving and blending of flowers. And this is a really big tool, because it can help to minimize a lot of that variability that might be occurring at the raw seed level, and really create consistent types of flowers to actually be sold. And this is where you can get into creating very customized flowers in terms of specific specifications. So something like particle size, where a coarse flower might be better suited for extrusion versus a fine flower might be better suited for bakery. And you can get into the details a little bit more, so blending for protein content or level of starch damage. So I wanted to pull this figure here as an example. So this is a study that we did in collaboration with Improve SAS, located in France, looking at adjusting the roller milling process, so changing those settings, and how that might affect the individual streams that are pulled throughout the milling, the roller milling process. So this is just looking at protein content specifically, where you can see that the protein was released a little bit more on the reduction side of the mill. And what that does is it allows for some higher protein streams and lower protein streams. So you can take that and benefit from it to create a higher protein flour or a lower protein flour. And that just speaks to the potential that blending has in creating very customized flours for specific end use applications. So then when we're talking about all the different types of flours that can be produced, well, there is a number of different ones of them. So here I've highlighted a lot of the factors that can contribute to unique differences in the type of a pulse flour. So here we have whether or not it has been additionally processed. So did it have a deflavoring step? Was it germinated, fermented, extruded? The presence of the hull is what determines whether or not it's a whole or a dehulled flour, as well as not all pulse types are the same. There's a number of different market classes that you can use to actually produce these flours. So what was that starting material? Another thing I wanted to mention, so this is another type of flour ingredient that's surfacing in the commercial setting. And this is something that's called starch-rich pulse flour. So this is something where you're going to take that flour that's been produced during a milling process and put it into the air classification system. So what this does is it separates starch granules from protein bodies based on differences in their size and density in an airflow. And this is typically the process that you would use to produce a protein concentrate. And you're left with this really unique fraction. And the coarse fraction, it's not quite a starch, it's not quite a flour, because the concentrations are a little bit different, but it's unique here because it can be labeled on ingredient listings as a flour. And one thing you'll note is that the main difference really being that there is much lower concentrations of protein because that's what would be separated out in that fine fraction. So here's just some example of that protein level in faba bean and pea ingredients, where the whole and dehulled flours of peas are sitting at about 20% protein. You get down to 9% for the coarse flour. Faba beans, they have a little bit of a higher naturally occurring protein content starting at 30, 35, and that goes down to 25% in that coarse fraction for this particular study. So now that we have an idea on the types of pulse flours, I wanted to dive into some of the end uses for these flours. And Julianne did a really good job of setting the stage as to really the big drivers to incorporating these flours into food systems. So that's things like the nutritional enhancements, some of the sustainability story that we can get by introducing and reformulating foods. But there are a number of different functional benefits that you can derive based on the properties of these flours. So that's anywhere from oil and water retention, foaming and emulsifying properties. That natural pigmentation of the seed can be used as a natural colorant in food systems. And then getting into the rheological and gelation properties can also serve and have an advantage in food systems. So because there's so many different types of ingredients, there's so many different ways to process it, it follows that there's a lot of different ways that we can incorporate them into food. So I'm going to take some time here to talk about some specific examples. So starting with batters, breadings, and coatings, there's opportunities here to substitute or replace certain ingredients in that coating formulation for fried chicken products, French fries, mozzarella sticks. And a really big benefit that we do see here is because of that Maillard reaction during the frying process is you get a really nice golden brown color development. And that's something this chicken on the slide here contains some red lentil flour in it. And you can see that nice golden brown color. But because that color development takes place so quickly, what actually happens in these food systems is you can decrease the amount of time required for cooking to reach that optimal development without compromising on the internal cooking temperature of that product. We also see some benefits in terms of textural characteristics of these products. So that includes things like crispiness, crunchiness, as well as holding stability. So I wanted to show an example of that. This is a study that we recently wrapped up with Prairie Research Kitchen out of Red River College in collaboration with Saskatchewan pulse growers, looking at substituting wheat flour in chicken tender breading systems with a dehulled red lentil flour. So you can see here that at a 20 to 40% substitution, that lentil flour really helped to contribute to a nice uniform color development. Where using milk to get that color development, there's a little bit of burnt spots on there. It's not quite as uniform. And by doing so, you can actually remove the milk from that ingredient listing, which is needs to be declared as an allergen. So there's an opportunity here to get that color development without at the moment having to declare lentil as an allergen. We also saw, particularly in the deflavored flours, which had some form of heat treatment to induce partial gelatinization of the starch, these were able to form a really nice gel layer on the outer surface of these tenders, and that helped to contribute to a higher crispiness and crunchiness of the final product. And this was really evident when these chicken tenders were stored in a takeout container, where about the 30-40 minute mark, they were able to retain that crispiness, especially compared to this wheat flour control. So that's something that's particularly really beneficial as we start to see more and more takeout food service options here. Another interesting area is in meat applications. So whether this is conventional animal-based meat products or meat alternative products, oftentimes these flours are added in as a binder to help to retain juiciness of that final product. But we also see some use in formulating low-fat products. So that's because of the oil binding, they can help to create a similar texture to a full-fat formulation. A really interesting example here is in heat-treated flours, there's actually the possibility to help to contribute to color stability in cold and frozen stored products. So this is an example I wanted to highlight here today, where this is a micronized lentil flour that was included at a 6% inclusion rate in low-fat burger formulations. And you can see it was quite successful in serving as a binder in this system, where there was a decrease in the cook loss, drip loss, as well as shrinkage. But because that micronization process, it inactivates an enzyme that's known as lipoxygenase, as well as the high phenolic content in lentil flour that can really help to contribute to oxidative stability and retain a lot of that bright red color in this refrigerated stored product. And that's that color difference that you can see here in the image on the slide. We also, in the meat alternative space, see a lot of demand to diversify away from soy ingredients. So I just wanted to highlight this as an example as a meat alternative product produced from fava bean flour that was subjected to heat set gelation. And you can see that you can produce soft and firm tofu products based on the amount of water that you're adding into that system. We're seeing a lot of use as well in the dairy and dairy alternative space. So again, whether that's conventional animal-based dairy or some of these analog type products, where we do see some benefits because of the thickening properties of pulse flours being used in yogurt formulations. So whether that's plant-based or animal-based, again, those heat set gels that were highlighted on the previous slide can also allow to help to contribute to structure and cheese analogs, as well as being used as a base material for a nutritious plant-based beverage. So I've highlighted here, this is just an image from a study in Foods Journal that looked at formulating a cheese analog out of pea and fava bean flours, and they were able to successfully produce a sliceable plant-based cheese where the hardness was a little bit higher than a Gouda product, but lower than this vegan commercial cheese product. And they did note in particular that the pea and fava bean products here had improved nutritional properties compared to this commercial control. However, there does still need to be a little bit of work on the sensory and technical properties of some of these products, but it's definitely feasible here. Another really interesting example is using lentil flour as a base formulation to create a probiotic lentil-based beverage milk alternative, where here, if you include the addition of enzymes that can help to reduce some of the viscosity of these types of ingredients, you can quite successfully create a milk-like beverage in texture. With here we have the quote saying that it was rich in soluble proteins, peptides, amino acids, where the process was quite successful in reducing some of the main anti-nutritional factors in that lentil flour. So if you wanted to get some of that viscosity development, this is an instance where you could utilize lentil or pulse flours and formulations, where smoothies is a really good example where you can get that nice viscosity enhancement to contribute to that final product texture. Again, very similar applications as in sauces, stocks, and seasonings, where here an interesting alternative use would be because of the emulsifying properties of these ingredients, they could serve as an egg replacement in these applications. So when we're getting into these cereal-based applications, so this is something that Julianne touched on quite heavily, the real benefit here is in that nutritional enhancements, the protein complementarity with cereal products. But in bakery in particular, we do start to see some other functional advantages here. So that moisture retention can help to contribute to a nice mouthfeel, reduce baking losses, and delay retrogradation and staling in certain products. And again, we can leverage that egg replacement, some of the emulsifying and foaming properties here, both within formulations or as a color development tool to replace an egg wash on pastry goods. So a lot of times when we're talking about bakery, because you're typically substituting wheat flour, you tend to see a reduction in the viscoelastic properties of the dough that can have a negative influence on the quality. But one thing I wanted to highlight here is that there's a lot of research that's been done and a lot of development that's been done in terms of modifying either the formulation or the process itself to produce a high quality end product, even though you're substituting some of that wheat flour. So this is just a picture here highlighting bread doughs that were formulated with 20% lupin flour, where by adding vital wheat gluten into the mix, you can get from right to left here an improved end product quality, where the gluten itself was incremental in improving crumb softness, loaf volume. And then here is another example of a study where the variety of lupin was different. So I wanted to kind of pull that in here as a highlight. Another tool that these authors used in this particular study was looking at two different baking process, where they found that the sponge and dough process, which is one that ferments the dough before you add in all of the other ingredients, so things like oils or sugars, that was a little bit more successful in creating a high quality product than adding them all in at the time to ferment together. Noodles and pastas, again, another cereal-based application where you're getting that protein complementarity. This is one where we're seeing a lot of companies leverage that natural pigmentation of pulses. So you can see this really nice picture here highlighting that color of the final pasta, where we can see up to 100% inclusion by formulating the pastas correctly or by modifying the process. So I wanted to highlight this particular study in which they were having some troubles formulating an 100% legume pasta because of agglomeration that was making the dough a little bit too sticky to pass through the extruder. But what they did is they found out that this agglomeration of the dough was being caused by redox reactions. So simply by using a low temperature mixing process or by using heat treated flours in which this lipoxygenase enzyme was deactivated, they were actually able to produce 100% legume-based pasta in this particular study. So lastly, I just wanted to end off here. One last typically cereal-based application is in extruded snack products, where here, very similar to my comments that I would have made about pasta and breads, there's a lot of opportunities to modify things like the formulation. So coming to an optimal starch content for that good expansion of the product, or through the actual process itself, where we see the moisture content being a very crucial parameter in terms of that final product quality. Or for example, coarser pulse flours might flow a little bit better through the extruder and might be more suitable for these types of products. So there's a lot of opportunities here to really formulate with pulse flours. So with that, I will wrap things up and looking forward to some questions later on here today.
Great. Thank you, Janelle. Wealth of information there. And, I think it was really helpful to take us through the ingredients. There's a lot of pulses to consider, but also a lot of factors to look at. And, all of these really influence quality. And so really understanding that is very helpful. Now, I also just seeing all those applications were actually very exciting for me because I'm going to take some time now and give you a sense of what's actually happening in the market because there's a lot happening. And so I am going to I have my presentation up and we're ready to go here. Okay, oops. So pulse flours, we heard a lot about the why, the how. Janelle talked about what makes them so functional, brought us through all the different applications. I'm now going to talk about what's happening actually around the world with pulse innovation and really highlighting the market dynamics and the opportunities there. So the pandemic has created this new consumer reality. As food prices continue to rise, consumers are having to manage the cost of inflation. A lot of us may have indulged a little bit too much during the pandemic and are now in a recovery phase where we're seeking ways to be more healthy actively. And lastly, with supply chain disruptions impacting our daily lives, the desire for transparency is bigger than ever. And so this is a really important time and opportunity for the food industry to step up and fill this gap. Now, pulse flours are unique because it does check a lot of those boxes, which we heard earlier. And as a result, these flours will play an important role in helping to create these nutritious, sustainable, and functional products that meet consumer demand. So my short presentation here will cover pulse flour demand, and it will also talk about some of the category highlights showing how these pulse foods are being positioned in the market. Now, in terms of uptake, so I'm going to start off with pulse flour demand, but in terms of uptake in the United States, the volume of pulse flours used by the packaged food sector amounts to just roughly 230,000 tons, and this is from 2020. But while these pulses have been pooled together, so that's the peas, lentils, chickpeas, and beans, we pulled them together for the purpose of the slide, the volume is still significant compared to some of these more common ingredients such as soy or pea protein. So what's driving this volume demand is food innovation. So this slide here, it's a graph that shows new product launches globally, so all around the world, that contain pulse flours. So each of these launches represent a new product that shows up on the grocery store shelf, and we basically added those up. And over the last decade, there was a 300% increase in product launches that contain a pulse. And this is a really good indicator that pulse flours are on the radar of many product formulators. And this interest is not limited to North America. The pie chart I just snuck in the bottom right shows the proportion of where pulse innovation is happening. There's a lot happening in India, as you can see, and flours are very relevant to a number of their staple food products that they consume. But also in the UK, there's a lot of pulse innovation happening there, and of course the US and also many places in Europe. So while the launch activity is increasing every year all around the world, the diversity of the applications is also widening. So you saw similar data here earlier, but this graph shows the top applications that pulse flours are being used in. Julianne mentioned a lot of them are cereal-based products, but there's also some meat applications. But you'll see the prominence of where the certain pulse types are being used in, as shown in the color bar. So whether peas, lentils, chickpeas, or beans were used. And so as an example, chickpeas, which you see in the blue bars, are quite well diversified in all applications. But it's more typical in sauces, as an example, as you can see in the larger proportion. And it's not as common in pet food, which is not a surprise. And pea flour is mostly used in pet food, but also in snacks and processed meats. Beans, on the other hand, are more commonly used in bakery products, and lentil is more common in pastas, which we're seeing a lot of, as well as in snack products. So I just wanted to dive a little bit into the specific pulse usage trends specific to lentils and chickpeas. It's interesting to note that lentil flour is following a similar footprint to chickpea flour. And this chart here shows the volume of both lentil and chickpea flour being used in the different product categories specific to the US. And chickpea got a head start, and lentil is just following through. And so you can see, so the chickpeas in the green, lentils in the golden or mustard color bar. And I guess one application where chickpeas are not as prevalent in is breakfast cereals, and it's a category where lentils seem to shine a little bit more in. Okay, so that was really a high level overview of pulse flour demand. And so this second section will highlight the categories that are innovating with pulses. And specifically, I wanted to show how the foods are being formulated with pulse flours, really how they're being positioned in the market to meet consumer need. So it seems like every day there's a new pasta on the market that includes pulses, and pulse flours are actually penetrating this pasta market quite deeply, and approximately 6% of new pasta launches over the last 5 years contained a pulse flour. And this chickpea pasta on the right is an example. It just popped up in my feed, and it shows how it stacks up to regular pasta with 50% more protein, 3 times more fiber, and 25% fewer net carbs. And it's quite front and center in the packaging. And here's a modern twist on classic risotto, which is a rice-based product. And this company here has prepared a risotto analog, in fact, that is made with a blend of flours. So it includes not just rice flour, it includes lentils, chickpea, peas, in a flour blend with rice. And not only does the pulse and the rice flour blend provide protein, but because of the complementary amino acids, it's a more complete protein, which they declare here. We heard about the power of blending pulses with other grains, but also other nuts and tubers, actually. It can actually boost protein quality. And this concept is demonstrated here in these multiple examples that you can see here on the slide. So just starting from the left, we have lentil chips made with a lentil potato starch blend. And not only does it have 3 grams of protein per serving, but it's 40% less fat than the regular fried potato chips, which is a bonus. And Nature's Path breakfast cereals contains 5 grams of plant-based protein per serving, thanks to the navy beans and the pea ingredients that are used in their formulations. And another example on the bottom right is blending green lentil flour with quinoa flour. It can produce a pasta product as high as 25 grams of protein per serving. So that's a pretty high level of protein to pack into your pasta. So we talked about protein quality, but there's this emerging interest in carbohydrate quality. And so these companies are leveraging that carbohydrate quality piece of benefit that comes with pulse flours. And a lot of these companies are positioning these products as low GI or low glycemic index. And you can see the pasta and the lentil waves on the left have that low glycemic index claim or positioning. And the pea pasta on the right also has that logo, which is quite central to the package. And you can see here on the top right, there's a low carb pancake mix, and they're using low carb to convey this concept of carbohydrate quality. And I guess I will mention in the case of the dog food product in the middle of the screen, it's calling out low glycemic binders, which demonstrates the dual benefit of pulse flours acting as not only a functional binder, but also it exerts a low GI, which is interesting. So lentils have increasingly been used in high fiber sweet treats as shown here. Brands can highlight fiber and protein content as well as the compatibility with vegan and gluten, about 4 to 11% fiber and a minimum, in some cases, to 11% protein, creating healthier treats, but they're still indulgent. So it makes you feel a little bit better. There's also a play on texture with the cookie product on the top left, creating a crunch with the chickpea flakes and chocolate, while the lentil puffs on the bottom left make a lighter, airier product. And really, this is all possible with the help of pulse flours. So it's clear that nutrition is a big win with pulses, but the sustainability story can also compel as companies aim for carbon neutrality. The bakery the bakery company on the left claims to be committed to reducing its carbon footprint, and they're compensating for 100% of their emissions. So they have that logo there. This is in France. And the vegetable cooking cream in the middle there is made with a blend of lentil and vegetable oils. It's dairy-free, and it has a climate footprint of 0.2 kilograms per CO2 per 100 grams. So this is a really interesting product that just got launched. And I'll just mention this cashew product on the right is a great example of a company measuring their carbon emissions, and they're tracking it all along the value chain. So they're really looking at the cooking process as well. So whether they're cooking or baking or extruding, so that they can offset these through other programs that reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that get into the air, into the atmosphere. So many companies are assessing their entire process to achieve these carbon offsets, and pulses can play a huge role there. Okay, so here are some examples of pulse flour applications where functionality is the main driver, as opposed to a nutrition or sustainability play. So these are 3 different gluten-free breaded products that contain pulse flours. The mozzarella sticks on the left contain a navy bean flour. It's mixed with corn and rice flour, making it gluten-free. And the breaded chicken nuggets in the middle are both gluten-free and lactose-free, whereas the potato puffs or the tater tots on the right are positioned not just gluten-free, but it's also crispy in texture. So all of these products here show some desirable browning effect, which is attributed to that Maillard reaction that Janelle had described earlier. Okay, so last but not least, pulse flours are slowly making their way into these meat alternative products, and these are pulse flours specifically. And the ground chicken burgers on the left contain a binder made of rice and chickpea flour, so it's a blend. And as a result, the chicken burger is gluten-free, but it's also talks about a smooth texture, a juiciness that's associated with that. The black bean burgers on the right is fully plant-based. So the left one is meat-based, but the one on the right is plant-based. And it boasts a 25% bigger burger, so larger size, but just 50% of the fat, so half that fat. That would be associated with having real meat. And the pulse flours in both cases serve as functional ingredients, and it's really, I think, to help achieve that product texture goal, as opposed to making a claim, a nutritional claim, for instance. Okay, and I wanted to this is the one last slide here about the products. Traditional markets are also taking advantage of functional food opportunities. And a lot of these products are from India. Products like dosas, noodles, and biscuits that are really traditionally pulse-based are now starting to leverage these different claims, such as low GI, high protein, and without really having to reformulate in a big way, because it already has pulses and pulse flours. But these claims on the package do help consumers navigate their food needs a little bit better. So we're seeing a lot more of this happening in these parts of the world. Okay, so I wanted to wrap up with a concluding slide. Consumers want to take greater control of their current and future health. The slide is from Intel. The pandemic has really resulted in consumers wanting to take even more control of their health, apparently, and there's an expectation that is going to support them in that effort to lead healthier lives. So here are just some consumer stats demonstrating these sentiments for better health. 42% of US consumers agree they prioritize their health in order to feel that control or feel in control. And just this Canadian stat here, an equal proportion of consumers felt either in control or less in control during the pandemic. There was a bit of ambiguity there. And 41% said that they would feel more in control of their health if they can change their diet. So in my view, this is what makes it such an exciting time for those involved in food innovation, because there's a lot of ingredients that you can play around with and to innovate with. So I wanted to just wrap up with the concluding slide. Consumers want to take greater control of their current and so I guess like with the consumers wanting to take control of their health, there's an opportunity for pulse flours. They're gaining a lot of traction in the global food sector. Of course, they check a lot of boxes. Companies around the world are using pulse flours to help in their product positioning to consumers through different various claims. And there's an opportunity to leverage those nutrition, health, sustainability, and the functionality benefits of pulse flours in a range of products to address some of those post-pandemic needs for healthy and sustainable diets and foods. So I wanted to also just acknowledge that we have on our resource page here a list of pulse ingredients suppliers that you can look for different pea, lentil, chickpea, and bean ingredients. And so there's a link there. I also wanted to draw attention to a pulse flour dashboard. This was data compiled by Euromonitor, and this is information just about the size of the market and the market trends. All available on our resource page. So with that, that concludes my presentation. And so we have some time now. We're going to bring back the other speakers, both Janelle and Julianne. And I was presenting there for the last 10 or 15 minutes there. And so I think there was a lot of questions coming through. And so we have about 12 minutes here. And so what we'll do is address some of those questions. And I know there were some questions that were nutrition based. And I think we can probably just go through them. So, and I guess both Julianne and Janelle, feel free to address any questions I might have missed when I was presenting. But I think just off the bat, I know there was some questions about, chickpeas and mung beans, and pulses cover is a really large category of pulse types. And so they all have their nuances. And so one of the questions was about chickpea flour and just about why it wasn't included in the nutritional comparisons of pulse flour. So I guess, I don't know if Julianne, you wanted to comment on that and just comment on the nutrition.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment there. So I didn't have chickpea flour included in those tables, or those figures rather, that I shared in the presentation, but there is nutritional data for chickpea flour available in the resources that we've provided in the hub. There's a brochure there that will have that data there for you. In the figures that I showed, I did have pea and lentil and faba bean flours. And with respect to pea and lentil, there was both whole and dehulled flours. And so that was, one of the points I was trying to demonstrate there, that, even with, flour being dehulled, we're still seeing those significant amounts of protein and fiber and minerals. So, but there is that chickpea flour available to you, data available to you in the hub there.
Perfect. And I guess I think an interesting question. I think let's just address. There was a question about mung beans as well, and their potential contribution to both nutrition and functionality. And so maybe just to comment on, if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I can kick that off and then I'll pass it over to Janelle. But just to mention, like our mung bean production here in Canada is relatively small, but nutritionally, mung beans would be, pretty similar to the other pulses and have those sort of core attributes that we talked about. So being the high protein, high fiber, high in micronutrients. Janelle, perhaps you can speak more to the functionality.
Mm-hmm. I know that the protein, I'm a little bit more familiar with the proteins than on the flour side of things, but the proteins have really unique properties that can more completely mimic egg protein. So I think a lot of those egg alternative products, they typically are using a mung bean protein, but it is a little bit harder to find a supply for just because of some of that limited production here in Canada. But they do tend to have a little bit more uniqueness on the protein side of things in terms of their functionality.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so there's some uniqueness for each of these pulse types. And I guess not all pulses are created equally either. And so maybe we can just draw like some of the major differences nutritionally around the different pulse types. We talk about peas, lentils, chickpeas, and beans as sort of the big categories. But either one of you, I guess, like I was thinking, Janelle, if you wanted to just comment on the overall nutritional differences.
Yeah, I think the big one being for chickpeas is a little bit of a higher fat content, and lupins as well, where chickpeas you're getting around 7% fat. On peas, lentils, you're seeing more closer to 1 or 2, 3% maybe at the max. So the fat content is something that's pretty distinct across pulse types. And we also see differences in terms of protein levels. So faba beans in particular can be anywhere 30, 35%. They're a little bit higher in protein. Lentils average around 27, where yellow peas, the average for Canadian peas is typically around 23%. So there's differences in some of these macronutrients when we're looking at the major nutritional properties, and then things like that seed coat thickness. So chickpeas, there's a little bit more difficulty in chickpeas and beans in terms of dehulling. So very commonly you'll see a whole flour and you won't see a dehulled flour because it's bound a little bit tighter and it's a lot more difficult to dehull than something like a pea, faba bean, or lentil. So there's some differences there. They're definitely not all one and the same.
Okay.
Yeah, just further to that too, there can be some differences in terms of the types of carbohydrates, that composition specifically in pulses. Like you may have higher levels of resistant starch in beans or more slowly digestible starch in peas. Also, some of the anti-nutritional components or those phytonutrients will vary depending on the different pulse types. So some differences there.
Okay, perfect. And there's actually a question on, we're going to just finish off these ingredient questions. What are the main differences in the nutritional functional specs between the different pre-gelled flours? So there was the red and green lentil flours that were pre-gelled. How do those compare?
Yeah, so pre-gelatinization, you're typically cooking the flour. So there's a lot of differences that you can get from cooking, where the application of heat can generally decrease the amount of anti-nutritional factors that are present. And we also tend to see some increases in the digestibility of some of the proteins and starches. And I think in our research center there's one of the manuscripts that describes some of the nutrient changes and protein quality specifically as a result of processing. On the functionality side, I think the real key difference is when you pre-gelatinize a flour, it's able to form a viscosity under a cold set conditions. You don't have to apply heat to get that viscosity development. So that's a really big use for those pre-gelatinized flours.
Okay. Perfect. And then I guess we also have a fiber question about fiber consumption, actually. So in the US, it's been told for a while now that we need to increase our fiber consumption. So do we think that plant-based, and more specifically plant-based meat, is a way to increase fiber intake? And is this demand for plant-based protein connected to the fiber demand? So that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I love this question. It's a great question because our fiber intakes here in North America are really low, and that is a kind of a significant contributor to health. Really need to look at increasing. And so if you think about what are the sources of fiber in the diet that you would be typically getting fiber from, it would be from fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, pulses, nuts and seeds. And so you don't typically get fiber from meat or meat analogues. And in the plant-based meat analogues in particular, they're using protein ingredients primarily, like plant protein ingredients, so not necessarily having that fiber fraction as part of it. So I wouldn't expect that those sort of traditional analog products, those plant-based meat products, would be necessarily a vehicle that people would be getting more fiber from. However, that being said, if you think about some of the plant-based products, like bean burgers or chickpea burgers, like I think that those are the types of products, because they use more of the whole ingredient, that are well positioned to deliver more fiber in the diet. And then we've also done, Janelle talked about meat applications like processed meat. If you're including a pulse flour, you're not necessarily including it in a high enough at a high enough rate to actually make a big boost in the fiber content. However, we've done a project where we looked at including like a more of a blended product with like a whole, like a pureed lentil ingredient. And that was a way you could incorporate a lot higher levels. And then we were able to, in that product, actually really boost the fiber. So not saying you couldn't, include fiber or use like meat and plant-based meats products to boost fiber, but it may be more in those sort of whole meat products that are not simulated or not meant to mimic meat. Or if you were looking at more blended products is another way to increase fiber, blended animal-based meat products.
Great. Yeah, so meat may not be the best vehicle for getting that fiber intake. Okay, and we just got another question about the allergen issue. And so when introducing new pulse flours, how do we address the allergen issues that may arise?
Yeah, so pulses have not been identified as a priority allergen in North America. However, because they are a high protein food and ingredient, and particularly when you have ingredients with more concentrated levels of protein, and as you see increased use of these ingredients in the food supply and in the diet, it's it would not be unexpected that we would see more incidences of allergenicity. And so it's something that there's no requirements right now to label them as an allergen, as they're not identified as an allergen. But I think that these ingredients are listed on food product labels, and so if there are individuals who do have an issue with allergenicity to these particular foods or their ingredient derivatives, then they would be watching for that specifically.
Okay, thanks, Julianne. Okay, well, it looks like we are coming up on time here. And we did get another question about different resources. And so, so there's lots of resources, and we have them up on our page. And you can also actually reach out directly to any one of us, and book a meeting, and you can do that directly on the reception page. So we're here, we're available, lots of resources, and we're happy to share. So I'd like to actually just take the time to thank all of you for joining us today. And it's certainly an exciting time for pulses. And pulses comprise of many pulse types, and their flour ingredients wear many hats, whether it's adding nutrition, functionality, or improving health and sustainability profiles. There's certainly a pulse for your application. So I'd like to thank my colleagues Julianne and Janelle for sharing their knowledge on pulse flours today. And we hope you found today's event to be valuable. So we will be, just one more time, we will be circulating the full session recording this week by email. And so you'll get that in your inboxes very shortly. And it's just a reminder that you can find all these flours on our reception page. It includes ingredient supplier list, has a calculator. There's a lot of publications and links to those. So be sure to visit that on our platform, and you'll also get a short survey right next to the stage chat panel. And we'd like to ask each of you to take a minute to provide your feedback on the event that we just had, so that we can work to provide more value to you during future events. So we really appreciate that. Thank you very much and have a good day.